What is up, guys? Fado82 coming at you with some raid camp footage from the US Rustopia server. As always, Rustopia is a vanilla Rust server with a 1-week wipe cycle, so what that means specifically for this footage is this is what you might expect to experience in Rust at this point in time if you were to play in a high population vanilla Rust server. When we say vanilla Rust, we're also referring to a server that doesn't have any additional modifications, so there's no increased gather rates, teleportation abilities, anything like that is not available to these players. It's a very hardcore, very intense experience. So getting right into it, this footage is from a forward operating base or a raid base that was put together by the YPB and 20R clans. They put it up very quickly because I was making the rounds spectating on the server, and by the time I came back around, this base had already been constructed. I missed a bit of a firefight here. They fired some rockets at DMG's main water base, put some holes in it that required that DMG patch up that main base, and then DMG took the fight back out to that forward operating base. Typically they're not built so close to a base, but DMG knew they needed to neutralize that spot in order to be able to live in this area, and it was a raid that was able to be pushed back because DMG came out of their base and pushed that forward operating base. A few days later, DMG took the fight to one of the clans that was raiding them in that footage, and this is the base of the 20R group. As you can see, 20R may have been caught off guard. Their furnaces are still going, so they might be a little low on resources, but DMG wasted no time getting through the high exterior stone walls with rockets and C4, blasting in there, and they're now making an attempt just to get right into the base, drill right into it, and see what's going on. When you're raiding a base of this size and of this complexity, you need to push forward very quickly. You don't have a lot of time to really scout it out. So what DMG is doing here, I think, is a great tactic that I always encourage people to use. And if you keep pushing forward, the defenders are going to have a hard time being able to gather their thoughts, and then it's going to keep the momentum of the raid in your favor. So as you can see here, DMG is blowing through the various layers of the honeycomb that's going on here, trying to figure out what the best route into this base is going to be. What they're looking for here specifically is a building cabinet that they want to gain access to, and they just discovered one by blowing out this wall here. As you can see, the cabinet's right there to the left. By gaining access to this cabinet, it's not the main cabinet in the compound, but it will give them some limited building privilege, which is very crucial for raiding. And as we'll see in a moment, this is a very technical raid cam, so we'll get into that in a moment. But they've breached a loot room here. There's probably some resources in there, as the stones indicate on the chests, but it's only a loot room and an auxiliary tower. It's not part of the main compound itself, so it was a lot of resources they had to use to get to that point. As you can see, that main base is layered up and surrounded by a morass of high exterior stone walls. So if they want to get into that main base, they're really going to have to think thoroughly and thoughtfully about how they want to potentially breach that main base, because to use resources on those high exterior stone walls is very difficult because that's a lot of walls to get through. So the defenders are doing their best to defend against the raid, but there's not enough people online. I'm not sure what was really going on with the defenders here, if they were running low on ammo or if some members just simply weren't online, but they're just getting shredded here, and there's not a lot of opposition to the raid. They're holed up in their towers, which is a tactic you always want to use if you're defending. Typically with a base this scale, the raiders aren't going to make up progress very quickly, but DMG, they are a group comprised of very experienced players. Love or hate DMG, if you play on Rustopia or Rust in general, you probably have come across some of the players, and they're skilled. They know what they're doing, and you know, that's something that is really demonstrated in this raid camp. So they realized quickly they weren't going to get very far by going through the base on the ground level. Due to that limited building privilege that they were able to acquire from that auxiliary building cabinet on the first floor, they're now going up vertically. So they're building up, and they're going to try to get through one of the open windows. That saves them on resources. And notice as soon as they put up the twig, it's shot out by the defenders. So great move on the part of the defenders, but DMG knows that to prevent against that, to lessen that impact, they can turn it to a higher level resource, which typically is wood, but in this case it looks like the person probably only has stone, so they upgraded it to stone. By doing that, the defenders then can't shoot out the twig, because once it's stone, it would require lots of ammo and probably rockets or C4 to get through. So inside that main tower, you can see there's a lot of sleeping bags, lots of positions to defend against, but there's simply not enough members defending against this raid right now. I firmly believe that there were more members of 20R or their allies who were online and manning this base, that this raid would have gone a lot slower. It may have still played out in the same fashion, but it definitely wouldn't have happened as quickly if there were more opposition. You'll notice in the background here, behind that main tower, there's a large flank tower. There was some fire coming in from that location, as well as an auxiliary flank tower off to the west of this base. So DMG is now on the second floor, but they're really no better off than when they were on the first floor. They're simply in the sort of the same situation of having access to relatively low value rooms. The defenders did leave open their bridge, which is made out of the twig tiles there, but they quickly realized that, and that was taken out so that DMG can't simply walk across that main bridge, because if they were able to do that, that would essentially take away from that defensive measure of having those high exterior stone walls. So this is a flank tower off to the side. There's one member in here, a lone member, who's putting up a heck of a good fight. He's actually taken out about a few members from DMG's crew, which you can see here in the bodies that are littering this tile set here on top of that base. And as DMG puts down more fortifications here, they're taken out by the remaining gunfire and even arrows in the case of the defenders here. So the arrows came out, and the defenders got primitive very quickly, which leads me to believe the defenders either used the bulk of their resources on a recent raid and didn't have a lot to defend with, or just simply had resources that were in production but weren't yet able to be made into ammo, like raw resources that weren't refined. Not really sure what's going on, but it wasn't enough of a fight to really keep DMG back. So as it turns tonight here, the raid is in full progress. DMG's wasting no time. Now that they've had some time to assess that main base, they're figuring out the best way into it, and they're sending rockets right into the middle, right into the core of that base. But specifically, they're opening it up to see where they're going to go next. So this is really what I want to get across in this raid camp, guys, is that raiding is a very technical process, and it's almost like a puzzle. If you're experienced with Rust raiding, it's hard to describe to other people. It's more than firing rockets and just getting into a base. You have to methodically think about how you're blowing apart these layers of the bases to gain access to things like desirable loot, but also, more importantly, in the current game mechanics, to those tool cupboards, because that's what you're really going to need to be able to take over the base and to progress further into it. So what DMG is trying to do right now is they are trying to use the rockets to blow up cabinets. They know that they can't jump into the base. The twig bridge has been taken out, and they can't walk across those high exterior stone walls. They would get shredded and die very quickly if they were to attempt that. So at this point in time, the members who are providing suppressing fire to Dirt's down there with a rocket launcher. He's hollowing into the base while we got some small arms fire going off on the beach and also at the main compound itself. So the night was very active here. There were players coming in, but again, the defense just wasn't what you would expect. Typically, a base like this is going to have what you would think a lot more, defenders, and then a lot more, just a lot more gunfire in this location. So again, I don't know the backstory there, so I don't want to speculate too much on that, but the Raiders are doing what they would need to do even if this base were being defended by 20 people. The Raiders need to keep pushing forward, figuring the base out, figuring the puzzle out, figuring out where to go next. It's extremely important to keep the momentum going. And that's exactly what DMG is doing. We haven't seen DMG raid for a while. I'm not saying they haven't raided, but I haven't been able to catch a raid cam from them. So this is interesting to see, and in my mind, they're really using best practices for raiding. So you can't do much at night. It's hard to see in Rust, but they are still trying to figure out what's going on in that base. They have it dialed in on where they believe is going to be one of the main cabinets. So as Dirt is firing rockets down here, and as the night turns to day, he actually was able to blow apart one of the main cabinets or probably the main cabinet in the base. That doesn't mean that he doesn't have to then contend with the other cabinets, because the main cabinet will change. But as you can see, the rockets that he's firing down there, he's exactly dialed in on a very important aspect, which is that cabinet down there. So as that cabinet blows up, which it just did, DMG as a group has now gained the ability to have extended building privilege, because they now have access to 2 cabinets on that portion of the base, on that angle of the base. So what this means is the puzzle has now changed in that the high exterior stone walls are less pronounced in terms of something that they have to worry about. So they can, if they can pull it off, what they're going to try to do, and what they're trying to do here is build a land bridge across the structure here right into that hole they built into the base, just enough so that they can either jump over the remaining high exterior stone wall or to get into the base itself, because that really now is essentially taking all of the security of the base and throwing it out the window, because this base design relied heavily upon those high exterior stone walls for defense. And DMG just took that ability of those high exterior stone walls almost right out of the equation. They still have to be worried about, still have to be contended with, but as you can see, the privilege that they gained from taking out that cabinet a moment ago allows them to very easily get over there. With the high exterior stone walls, you'll hear that some of the players are still taking damage. Some of that barbed wire actually will go up through the floor tiles, so you have to be very careful about that, because that stuff will shred through players. And if players get stuck there, they pretty much have to hand their loot off to somebody else, because they're going to die relatively quickly. So at this point, the main base, the main tower has been breached, which isn't a good situation for the base defenders. DMG is now down here on the ground floor. Their members at this point in time have demonstrated some very good teamwork, some very solid tactics, and I don't have really any criticisms, I think, about what the Raiders are doing here. In terms of the defenders, I think that the defenders who were online did the best they could do, but my question is, where were the rest of the defenders? Where were their allies? Maybe the raid happened just at perfect timing when the group was out raiding another base. Again, I don't know, so I don't want to speculate or make anybody, feel as though they're being shorted or slighted. But the raid happened very fast. So typically when a raid starts happening on a Vanilla Rust server and we see a base of this size, I have to hunker down for what's going to be quite a long time. Depending how the raid goes, depending how the defense is, it can sometimes be upwards of 2 hours, an hour and a half, 2 hours sometimes with larger scale raids. But this one probably lasted just under 50 minutes, and I was able to condense it down into this footage. So the raid didn't happen as quickly as it happened in the footage, because you have to condense down a lot of dead footage and shaky free cam footage. But all in all, the raid happened extremely quickly for a base of this magnitude. Now, I love this base design. I don't think that there were any inherent flaws necessarily with the base design. I think that it was just that the defenders weren't able to mount enough of a defense to keep the Raiders pushed back. So again, guys, as we wind this raid cam down, I just really want to impress upon this raid cam, even though it's not the most action-packed with gunfights and bodies, it's a very technical raid cam, one that I don't often capture. As always, guys, if I missed anything or if you have any feedback for the Raiders or Defenders, go ahead and leave a comment below. Had a lot of fun making the video. As always, Fado82, peace.